So I'm going to say welcome, Michael.
Thank you, dear heart, and welcome everybody. Delighted and honored that you're here. We've got this awesomely beautiful day. It's a little on the warm side. It's 87 degrees here in Bristol, Virginia. Sunny. Got some good garden work done this morning. Awesome tomatoes coming out of the garden. We're blessed. So, Miss Jeannie, do we have anybody in the phone queue with a hand up or anything happening in the chat room?
No, it's all quiet here. Ari and I just got back just a few minutes ago. We were longer at the doctor's office than we thought. But I'm doing, it went really well. He said that we were going to try to go just every 2 weeks now and see how I do. So he was very pleased with the progress.
Is it getting pretty close to full range of motion?
Yes, very close. There's just a few areas that I turn it and it hurts, but for the most part, it's back to normal. And you do have a hand that just went up.
Well, let's say hello then.
Okay, it's area code 904. You're on the air. Who do we have?
Hi, aloha, Dusty, and greetings.
Hey, Dusty, we haven't heard from you since yesterday. Aloha, come on back.
Yeah,
good, buddy.
Things have gotten better just then, and we had a conversation yesterday about why is this happening to me, and in a particular way, and with incest survivors, and a girlfriend of mine who, she was my last girlfriend, out of the blue, there's a message. I haven't even answered it yet. She called. Her ears must have been burning because I was talking about her. She ran the women's battered shelter here. She was the director for about a decade. And got to see a lot of people come and go with it. It was a lot of why is this happening to me again? And they would go right back into the fray. You know how that is. And some of us take a long time to learn things, you know. So, but I wanted to check in with you because before I got sidetracked with something else, and say that I really, again, I mean, every time I call, I say the one thing that I love about your show is that I hear the word love mentioned, and it's not puppy love. It's a greater love, and I always appreciate that.
Well, that definitely is the master healer, the master solvent that removes everything that does not belong. And I was just actually talking to someone about that idea, and we're not talking about as you say, puppy love. That's a good way to say it. We're not talking about some kind of sexual athletics or self-sacrifice or nothing that could be described in terms of what the world speaks of represents that state of being, that presence of being that we are as human beings. And the objective, of course, is to recover literally our human lives, which is that presence of love. And when we do, because it carries such profound power, everything changes. The worst dramas, the worst dramas begin to dissolve, begin to melt. Doesn't mean they're forgotten, doesn't mean they never happened. It just means they no longer control the game. Literally, the active presence of love becomes the control factor in this whole process, this whole game of life. And so we're talking about recovering the state of being that is literally our human life. Yeah.
Right.
So was your friend sharing anything in particular about the conversation we had?
Well, I didn't know that she had called because I was down at the beach, in a process, a love process, it was wonderful, and with a couple of friends, and I didn't know that she had called. I just noticed it just before your show began, so I haven't called her back. And but in this women's battered shelter, I mean, initially this started back in the 90s when this part of Florida, there was a lot of, should we say, there was a lot of coarse. There were some coarse people that were really would contribute to the battering, and it started in the home of two women who just were taking other women into their homes. I mean, it was just wonderful. There's love. Now that was love, because it was, and they really went all out. And finally, somebody stepped up to the plate that was older, that had some money, that started a shelter. And then my friend was the director, chief CEO, whatever, of that for about a decade, and saw a lot of people come and go, a lot of women come and go, and part of what she had to do at times, and she was so good at it, that she might have to explain to friends or relatives or another agency that didn't understand, what the heck is this? What is this, why again thing happening? Why did she go back? If someone was dead, like somebody's daughter's dead, and she's sitting in a room talking to the parents, trying to explain to them in some way how this happened without denigrating the daughter, of course. And it was a real dance, and she was brilliant at it. And I can't wait to call her back, Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I didn't know if I was.
It'll be interesting. Oh, you're loud and clear. Yep.
Good.
And it'll be interesting to see if her call was stimulated by the conversation you were having yesterday. Because it was just
absolutely right. Because then she was so on my mind. Anyway, I mean, I was long overdue to give her a call back. She moved up near your area somewhere with her kids and grandkids, and I know it was. I know it was kind of kick-started by the intention and the thought processes here. It just had to be. I didn't immediately do that when I saw her name.
Right. Interesting. Well, we had shared.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that. Oh no, you go ahead. You start, please.
Well, I've got a longer story to tell, so you go ahead with your thoughts.
Well, mine was a little bit of a diagonal here, but there have been times in my life, and I go through periods where I'll be all of a sudden someone I hadn't even seen in 40 years. It's like this little voice in my head goes, "Call so and so. Call so and so." Well, I don't even know where so-and-so is, or what their number, or anything, blah, 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 blah. And, well, call anyway. I mean, really, it almost comes like that at times. And It turns out and I went through a whole period where I was calling people just before they died, just in time to talk, or actually go see them and help them at hospice or something, and tell them some things that needed to be said, and they weren't necessarily mine to say, but words to write. So that happens, I guess, is my point. What you said, the loving universe has a way of connecting us in the bigger heart radio, if you will.
Right. Well, it's interesting that that was how I got back in touch with you, Dusty, after probably not having any connection with you for 20-some years. And there was just something that said, "Find Dusty, get a hold of Dusty," and I had no idea where you are. I'm glad it was to have conversations while you're still very alive and well, and years later now from our reconnecting, that still carries on. So
yeah,
I think it's a really sweet thing to do. In fact, I posted something on my Facebook page yesterday, or reposted something, and someone else had said, get into the habit. Just because you think of somebody, call them. Just call them. Make that contact. You never know what the universe holds in store.
right.
But yesterday we were talking about abuse, and there were a couple of situations at HeartLand that we saw over the years. One of them was a case where a young lady had been sexually abused by her father and was deep in process around that issue. And there was a man in the workshop who came forward and owned up to the fact that he had sexually abused his daughter.
Oh my God! Really?
Which just aroused, of course, the hackles on everybody's backs. And it was just a really powerful healing space, not just for her, but for him to deal with some of the abuses he had had.
I'm sorry. I have a question. I just want to interject. So when he owned up to it, he wasn't doing it as a thing. He was genuinely contrite, and it was a process of love.
Well, one of the things that we'll often do in an intensive when somebody's going through an issue is invite someone in the group to role play the person on the opposite end of the trauma, and that's how that came about. Only he didn't just volunteer as, okay, I'm in the audience, I'll play that role. A part of him volunteering was to say, and I don't really have to pay the role because I did that. And I really realized that I have some deep healing to do, and both of them went into really monumental process. And ultimately, and a lot of people don't think of, the trauma that the sexual abuser has been through, that leads them to abuse, not in any way, shape, or form letting them off the hook. I mean, there needs to be accountability, absolutely. But what he ended up doing, she actually did some really deep processing, and then it turned around, and she became his support in dealing with not sexual abuse that he'd had, but abuse that he'd had as a kid that was a factor in his, functioning unconsciously for most of his life and using sex as an addiction to avoid dealing with his life.
Right.
And it was a powerful healing space for everybody in the room. Those who had, and there was more than one who'd experienced sexual abuse, and those who had not, it was still just an extremely powerful healing process for everybody.
Wow, that's really neat. Usually the abusers, there was something in their past, but no, some are just, I don't know. I'm sorry to say that some are. I don't know. Some come from a place like he did, maybe, and others don't, I think, and most never own up to it or even admit, what I'm saying. But that is a beautiful thing. I have, however, heard it used as an excuse where someone said, "Oh, well, they're going through a rough time," or something. Well, I go, well, hell, I mean, some people have just been fighting for their existence practically on this, at least on this planet, because of some abuse, and they're not out there killing people or hurting people. So I've heard it as an excuse as well, and I'm with you. You don't get off the hook on that, but it is an opportunity for everybody to grow if that's indeed what everybody is capable of. And the one thing I'll have to say is that regardless of what kind of really deep healing, the darker and the heavier and the harder and the more life and death it was, and for a little girl to be raped by her father I'm sure it feels like a life and death situation at the time. It's such, oh my God, my thought process is that, well, it doesn't really, regardless, it doesn't give one license, to do the same. I don't think. I thought about this a lot, and I'm a little bit of a loss for words for some reason on this right now. And so I'm going to just say that I want you to, if you would please, if we're going to continue any of what we were doing, go ahead and tell me what you sparked you yesterday that you wanted to continue.
Well, just our whole conversation yesterday led to an opening that seemed appropriate to share that, and I've actually got one other situation that came up and happened in intensive that I'd like to share that really opens a space for people to see that healing is possible. And my take is there is no human being that has ever abused another human being. It can't happen. It is not in the nature of a human being to abuse another. But you remember Yeshua gave an offering to humanity where he said, in order for you to live, you've got to die. And if I were to expand that out into our English language today, I would say, repeating that or translating that from the Aramaic would be, in order for you, non-being, traumatized, hurt, suffering person, to actually come back to life, and life is love flowing through a cell, you're going to have to die to that pain, that trauma, that hostility or fear that took away your human life. You're going to have to face it. You're going to have to process through it and free yourself from it. Yes. And to me, that's what this whole body of work is about. Whatever traumas somebody's carrying around, even if those traumas never happened to them, oftentimes those traumas can be simply genetic, but they're still carried around just as powerfully. And so when human life shows up, abuse ends, period. That's just the end of it. But human life doesn't show up when there is a non-human false self structured into the mind and one has lost their identity to that. So to me, whatever someone has done that comes from that non-being mind, it is going to heal when, one, whatever it is surfaces, like full-blown, and two, if when it surfaces, active present love, actual love is there, then there's going to be the dissolution of whatever that non-being self, that non-being trauma is about, whether it was one's own experience or not. Energetically, it's going to have to come to the surface. It's going to have to come out of hiding. And that's where, when they said the veil of the temple must be rent in twain, they weren't talking about a purple curtain in a church. They were talking about literally this body-mind unit is the temple, and it's the barrier between the subconscious and the unconscious mind. It has to be opened. And when it's opened, whatever's in there is in there. And most people have no idea that they're simply, I'm talking about the lowest, most rotten person in the world, has no idea what it is they're functioning from because they've had a false self built into brain cells that because of the generational patterns, because of the culture, whatever's gone on, they're able to somehow cope with that or carry those behaviors forward. And to me, the whole objective of this work is to break down that barrier, to gently open that barrier. Maybe break down is a little too to harsh an idea, but to open that barrier. And the most powerful way I know to open it is with the breath. The gentle use of the breath opens it and gives us access to the underlying hidden dynamics. You know, we go back to Paul, and Paul had an inkling of this, but he didn't have an idea how to get there. You know, he talks about how he wishes he could do certain things. He says, why is it that which I would do, I cannot do? And that which I hate is what I do. He doesn't understand his own unconscious dynamics.
Well, you know that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, that this, everything that you've been saying ties in with what I was really wanted to emphasize was that when Paul couldn't find, you know, what he was looking for, I think that culture in general, this culture, human nature, whatever, civilization, there's a tendency to think acquisition. Oh, I need more of this, or I need this, or I need, where actually often it's, no, I need to empty this. I need to be in touch with
what forgiveness does.
And you know, the one religion, and there's people like Stephen Hawkins and other people that really like this part, was in the Hindu. They really understand that, you know, things have to die to be born, and you know, to put it in a very day-to-day manner, if you're going to want to eat that breakfast, at some point along the line, you need to evacuate your bowels. You know, there's an emptying process. That's part of life, in and out. And I don't think that's the first thing that pops into most of our minds. It's more about acquisition. If I just had this, rather than letting go.
Well, I forget the name of the band. You'll probably know them instantly. That gave us a perfect tune that describes exactly what you're talking about, Beck. I don't know, this is probably 3 or 4 decades ago. You'll remember the melody line, I can't get no satisfaction. And most everybody's looking for satisfaction. Most everybody's looking for sensation rather than transformation. Oh, give me another sensation, then I can feel good. Give me another sensation. Give me something to put in my mouth. Give me money to put in my pocket. Let me fill my bank account. Let me get something else. And what's really needed in that life is transformation, is opening and looking beneath the surface.
Right, and it's the phrase "sensation junkie" popped to mind. Some of us more so than others. But the very first song I wrote, and it was about the time that, you know, we were in proximity, or I wrote. It was a process I noticed in nature. And the very last line, it's talking about leaves falling from a tree, and the very last line is, leaves can share the secret of how to grow. The first step is always letting go.
Yeah, nice.
And I have friends quote that back to me 40 years later, you know. So,
that's cool.
Yeah. So I have to remember my own, it's easy to lose track sometimes when you're in the fray of something. But lessons you've already learned. You go, wait a minute, don't I already know this one? Yeah, okay. Well, then do it. Be it. And so that's one.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to mention about, I told you, and I'll make this extremely succinct. I was fortunate enough, middle 80s, Sun Valley, Idaho, upscale valley, about 10, 15,000 people. Anyways, I was fortunate enough to sit in a room. I was the only male there. There's about a dozen of us, 10 of us all together, and the gals in there were all the term incest survivors.
Right.
And And one thing that I learned during that whole process, I wasn't there to be a voyeur. I was working on my own stuff, and fortunate it wasn't sexual. It was it was comparable in terms, believe it or not, in terms of brutality, but it was not sexual. So I was managed to help the polarity of us and them, I guess. But two things that that I wanted to point out, and I'm going to write myself a quick note here, was that the olfactory senses sometimes can spark memory. I read this long before the internet even. So maybe it's true.
Very powerful.
Yes, and I have to say, one time and part of what got me into therapy, into full-on therapy, was a friend and I we were both at our top of our game in terms of musicians. I was in an orchestra, and I played the horn, and we both played horns. Anyways, we had a school bus. It was kind of a throwback to the 60s, and the two of us were going all the way down to the tip of Baja and to do some surfing. And we stopped at his family's place in Southern Cal, which was right next to where I had endured barely huge abuse, and as about a maybe 3-year-old, 2-year-old, something like that. And I didn't know about any of that, and I mean, really, it was a shadow to me, but it was the smell. I love this smell in Idaho when it's even a light rain and the breeze blows through the sagebrush. I love the sagebrush smell. It's so renewing. It's magic. But there I was in back while my friend was doing something, and this place was out in the country, and I started meditating, and there's a light rain, and that brand or that type of sagebrush or creosote or whatever it was, an aroma came up, and Michael, it drove me absolutely batshit, if you excuse the expression.
Oh.
I went crazy. It drove me, that smell triggered the heart of this thing. And I was just, I mean, it was like a hand reached inside me and just started shaking, and I couldn't get rid of it. I knew I had to go process it. I knew I had to go see this particular therapist who knew about this stuff back in Sun Valley. But I'd already committed to driving all the way, 2 people when a school bus, you really needed to handle it. I had to bail on my friend, which I felt so bad about. I had to bail on the surf trip, which I ordinarily would never do. But it was so powerful, the olfactory, that drove me to the feet of this therapist. And the other thing I wanted to share that was very important, when we went around the circle, because I did this thing with these gals twice a week for a long time, and is that Jean Jensen, God bless her, I can't remember any of the women's names, but I'll never forget her. She would make a point, well, okay, you've got these feelings or these dim memories. They're almost like an old black and white movie that you can just barely see. And there's a tendency to wonder, did this, I'm making this up. Did that happen? No, that couldn't happen. What is that? But why does it keep coming up? Why again, And she said, no, go ahead and treat that, we were in a room where it was all, I will actually say super safe to the point it's sacred, and follow those threads. So what I'm saying to anybody that's listening is sometimes those funny little, memories come up, and and maybe they're so heinous or not that you don't know whether to believe them. You think you're just, this is just part of a kid's dream or something. And it turns out more often than not, and in my case, it absolutely was true. I did months of therapy just on that.
Yep.
And that's something that came up that I just felt it was important to say.
Yeah, the olfactory sense totally bypasses the cognitive brain.
Yeah.
It goes right to the primitive. Yeah.
And then you can't go into cognitive disassociation of any kind. I mean, if it comes up, and when things come up is typically the time where if you're alcoholic or whatever your drug of choice or whatever your sensational junkiness wants is where a lot of people will run to, where the truth is when these things come up in us, that's the time to work on them.
Exactly. And the gateway drug for most people when those sorts of things start to move, as we were talking about yesterday, is hostility.
Yeah. Yeah. Hostility and to the point of rage.
Yep.
Yeah. Sometimes.
That's a powerful drug, powerful anesthetic.
Wow. Yeah.
So breathing with you, my friend.
Yeah, I was reliving a little bit of that one, and it was something that no kid wants to believe or have happened, but it did. Turns out there was, years later, I found out there was even a witness. I had a half-sister I didn't even know existed, who was 8 years old, sitting out in the car, and knew of this, and saw me taken away in the ambulance. And so, yeah, when those things come up, that's the time to go for it.
For sure. Well, is there anything about that you need to process now that we can support you with?
No, I'm fine. No, I'm fine. No, I think that I'm a little distracted because just my own biological workings. I'm going to have to go into another room here pretty soon. Plus, my friend, I haven't called her back, and so. But no, I'm fine. I don't have to process that right now. I thought that maybe by going into it a little more and talking about it, it might benefit someone else. I mean, I get it. I still, and it's one thing to understand and love and everybody involved in the process, and but I'm still amazed that something like that could even happen. You know what I mean? As I'm sure anybody that's had really heinous abuse at a very young age, if they get in touch with it, it's hard to even believe that it happened. So, yeah, so, but sometimes it takes, I almost hate to say it, but sometimes it takes another person who can just not shut off their, well, I got something I want to say, you know, they have someone who wants to just talk to a phone and actually listen to where the heart of what you're saying is coming from, and vice versa.
It's powerful. And I'd like to bring it full circle from where we started at the beginning of the show when we first spoke. We were talking about love. And my offering, you know, as you mentioned, the idea of, well, you know, when a situation happens, you're supposed to love people. And my input there is, no, it's not. There's nothing here about loving people. There's nothing here about loving yourself in the healing process. That's a total misnomer. It's a misuse of the word love. When we're talking about love being the master solvent and the healer, we're talking about the fact of human life is that of love. It's not something we do to somebody. It's not something somebody can do to us. It's a state of being that needs to be reclaimed from the abused self. And so we're talking about bringing love present to a circumstance or a situation. Many people who've been abused oftentimes will resist going to the place of healing because they think that means they're supposed to love the person who beat them. And we would not suggest that to anybody in a million years. You might choose to apply forgiveness to the, or pardon me, we would suggest you apply forgiveness to the pain involved to remove that so that you can stand as a space of love, but it does not require reconciliation or any action whatsoever toward that person. It's an internal process of reclaiming the true self.
Kind of where I've come out on that is, I mean, it's kind of in the ballpark of what you're saying, is that I don't love what happened. I don't love, you know what I mean? It's, other words, you don't have to like it. But in the end, if one processes things within, and love is still present in everything. So that, just acknowledging that and understanding that that action was an aberration. In other words, I kind of make a distinction between the two in a way, and because there's a tendency sometimes you can't hate, you just can't hate. That's, if you hate somebody for something or have that, any of that, you're actually destroying yourself, I believe. And so, yeah, I like what you just said about it, that love is present regardless. But I would say the action, again, is an aberration of that somewhat, if it's that heinous. Does that make sense?
Awesome. Well, holding the space, my friend.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine. Yeah, I mean, I'm not here to process. I'm just here to share.
Good. Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I asked, did that make sense?
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah.
That's where the work is, for sure.
Because sometimes if you do a lot of deep work, it's getting the words in this particular, language together in the right way, so it can be conveyed as something else. I will I shared a lot yesterday, and probably more than maybe needed to be, but I would ask you, if you would, is there anything about all of this that before I need to go, that it would be a good idea to bring up?
No, it sounds like you're recognizing. I'm suspecting that maybe going back with Gene and such, that your mind maybe is ready to process another layer of all that you went through in that, having that support from her. And it doesn't surprise me that the young lady who called you as a result of yesterday's processing is on the phone. And I have this sneaking suspicion that perhaps that's going to open up the next layer for one or perhaps both of you.
Yeah, and also a part of what you're hearing in my voice is, you remember when you called back around New Year's, and I was it couldn't make sense. I was going load it all over. I had a mouthful of rotten teeth that I thought the VA was going to take care of, and they did not. And 2 of them fell out, and I got pneumonia. And since then, I've been to I finally got a hold of the right dental organization, and just about every tooth in my head, all but 2, need to come out. And I find myself having to be, it's making certain moments way harder. I had another tooth fall out a couple of days ago. I thought I was going to get pneumonia again, and I took real good care of myself. I still am. So I'm pulling out of some of that right now, and I'm very fortunate that in a couple of weeks I will hopefully get some of this stuff out of my head that's been poisoning me. And it's interesting to actually acknowledge the extra load and to find ways of dealing with it, even though there for a while, a couple of weeks ago, I was just, oh man, my face I looked like something out of a sci-fi movie, the way I was moving my face around. And I really thought I'd alienated myself from some really beautiful people on the street. And I ran into them on the beach yesterday, and everything was just very loving and healing.
Sweet.
And I'm grateful.
Awesome. Well, holding the space.
Well, yeah, because I think that's part of what you're hearing is me. I'm struggling a little bit with just about everything along these lines right now. And that's okay. I'm good for it.
I'll notice you've got a whole community here just extending love in your direction.
Well, thank you very much. And I know that, you two, you and Jeannie, God, I'm glad you two hooked up. You know.
So am I.
Yeah, I'll bet you are, my brother. I mean, I bet you are. I love a win-win. It's a win-win. Then it becomes a win-win-win. You know, it's just big. And so all right. God bless everyone.
All right. Lots of love and blessings. Take care. Bye-bye. Appreciation to the whole community for just holding the space and being the support. So, Miss Jeannie, do we have anything happening in the chat room? Anybody else in the phone queue? Any more emails or anything coming from the app?
I have something I just wanted to add to the conversation.
Please do.
I do have a question from an email. When you were talking about it doesn't require reconciliation with the abuser, and that the process is within, and talking about a tendency to go towards hate. It took years of doing this work for me to get to the point where I think that I could run into my abuser on the street without thinking hate or even murder. It doesn't mean I'm pardoning for what he did, but I have faced the emotions in me and done my forgiveness work around it. And I'm not done, obviously, crying yesterday as I read the lyrics to that song, Warrior, but I've come a long way with it. And
mountains have moved.
Yeah. And the question from the email is along these lines, too. It says, if one is a little child and they're surrounded by trauma and abuse and they grow up with those traumas, how can they ever overcome it? For example, as an adult, we have these forgiveness tools. We can use them, knowing what's going on, resonance, etc. But as kids, being abused and traumatized, and they're not aware of these tools, and they collect these emotions and thoughts and grow up with them, how does one deal with those things if the child has no choice but to put up with it? They can't leave or go anywhere. What are your thoughts?
Get the tools and the support to the child as quickly as possible, number one. Number two, each of us that does our own work, whether it's our own childhood abuse or our own having abused, that chooses to step in and do our own work, acquire the tools, acquire the skills, and do the work, literally, energetically opens a space for everyone on the planet with the same issue. You know, I like to use the example of, let's imagine we've got an old rickety house and there's a basement, there's a sliding glass door in the basement. And Everybody in the family has gone down and tried to open that door. It's been closed for so long. There's so much corrosion, so much rot in the wood around it, so many pitted spots that the aluminum is almost welded together. And everybody in the family's tried to open that door, and that door doesn't open. And one day, one family member shows up with the proper tools and goes down and does a repair on that door. Cleans out the tracks, lubricates the tracks, puts new wheels on the tracks, polishes away the corrosion, and now with one finger you can open the door. Anybody in the family who goes down to the basement now can open that door with one finger. Each person that does their work energetically opens the door so that anyone who does not have the tools literally become available to them through the fact that the energy field of those tools has been strengthened by other individuals using them. And for documentation of that, I like to turn to, and you can do some research on the patent office. And you'll find, and you realize how energy moves if you look at the patent office. There are many occasions, many documented cases where some new invention has come and been patented. And within a period of a day or two, that same invention, which has never been available on the earth in all of history, all of a sudden, within hours of each other, 3 different people on 3 different continents patent that device or that invention on the same day. Now, when you realize that we don't live in a physical world, but we live in a world of energy, and every energy that we hold, literally on the level of the mind, moves throughout the planet with no interference whatsoever. There's nothing in the physical world that we know of that can stop the high energy wave that leaves the mind when we think a thought. You know, I'm in a room, and if somebody's in the next room and the door is closed, they don't know whether I've got the light on or not, because the light will not penetrate the door. The light energy that's closed in this room right now hits the walls. It literally, on an atomic level, its energy is absorbed by the wall and is held in the wall, and nobody outside of the room knows there's a light on here. But if I raise my voice loud enough, somebody outside the room knows that I'm yelling. Because although the energy from my voice, much like the energy from the light, some of it is absorbed by the wall, because it's in a different frequency range, it is able to penetrate the wall, and someone outside of the room knows that I'm shouting. If I put enough soundproofing material in, I can shout till the cows come home. Nobody outside the room is going to know it. But if I set up an X-ray machine, somebody outside the room with X-ray sensitive material is going to know that that X-ray is operating in the room, because a high energy wave that leaves the X-ray machine totally and completely penetrates. The wall is totally and completely transparent, just like the wall was transparent to my voice until I put soundproofing in. Now, if I put an 1/8 of an inch of lead and line the room, the person with the X-ray sensitive material on the other side of the wall cannot gather any of it, because literally the energetic particles that are leaving the X-ray machine, when they hit the lead, the atomic structure of the lead is deep enough that it creates an interference pattern, and it absorbs all of those X-rays. Then if I go to gamma rays, well, gee, once again, that 1/8 of an inch of lead is nothing. It passed right through. And so it'll take 18 inches of lead to stop the gamma ray. There's nothing we know of on the planet that is dense enough in what we call the material world to stop a thought. And so one of the most powerful things we can do is to do our work, clean up our own minds, and make our minds available to the active presence of love that we are, so that everything that we focus on comes through that active presence of love. That's my offering, is that's the most transforming power that there is in the world. And when we can get that one to go to critical mass, Yeshua said it 2,000 years ago. Yeshua was a physicist. He was not a theologian. And he said a little leavening leavens the whole loaf. He was not talking about bread. He was talking about physics. He was talking about critical mass, that all it takes is a small number of people to do the work of healing and to literally bring the conscious active presence of love into their physiology. And when enough people do that, we hit a critical mass point, it becomes available to everybody. So that would be my take on what we can do for the child that's isolated and abused, is do our own work, bring forward the presence of love, and pass the work on to others so that we hit critical mass. And when we hit critical mass, then the energy that has come to critical mass becomes available to everyone. Of course, everyone who's willing to listen. That would be my take. I hope that makes sense. That fits.
And Dusty's got his hand back up again.
Oh, great. Let's go for it.
A quick note on that. Even back in the time when we knew each other initially, I had this saying in my head, and I'm not making this up, very simple. I thought about politics, and I never thought, for me at least, that that was the way to do it. Consciousness was. And I think that's what I just heard you say, in a way that consciousness is the intent. But the little saying in my head, and I thought you'd get a kick out of it, that I've been carrying around for years, is that in these kinds of things, consciousness trumps politics. Consciousness trumps politics. Yeah, those were the words I had back then. And
interesting.
Yeah, and I really believe it. And that's why a show like this can make more difference than, electing another city commissioner who's going to be doing the same thing. So, consciousness trumps politics. That's it.
Yeah, let's go for the healing process.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I will say adieu and thank you.
Okay. Aloha. So, Miss Jeannie, we've got about 7 minutes left, 5 minutes left, something like that. Do we have anybody else out there in the phone queue with a hand up, or anything happening in the chat room?
No, it is all quiet. Oh, a hand just went up, and it's Mr. Michael. Welcome, 770.
Hi, friends. How are you?
Hey there, young man. Rocking along. How about you?
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Thanks. Couple quick thoughts. We got a few moments. And did I comprehend this clearly, that no material can stop a thought? Is that, I kind of got distracted while you were explaining that.
Correct. There's nothing dense enough in the material world. When you think about the X-ray, an eighth of an inch of lead, there's enough density there to absorb through the collision with the atomic structure. The energy of the X-ray is absorbed. Gamma ray, no. 18 inches of lead, there's nothing we know of. that can stop the high energy wave that leaves the mind when we think a thought.
That certainly is mind-boggling, because help me through this one, but when I think of a thought, the energy in a thought, that connects with the ether. So if I extend that further, that nothing is dense enough that we know about to stop any kind of energy in the ether then.
Well, I'm not sure how you make that. Yeah, I don't know how you jump to that conclusion.
Well, I don't know either. I'm thinking that all of our thoughts collectively are in the ether, right? At least that's where I am.
My take would be that when one thinks a thought, very much like throwing a pebble in a pond, when that pebble interacts with the water, it creates a wave. When a thought moves in the mind, it creates a wave. And there's nothing dense enough, nothing that can absorb that high a level frequency to stop the movement of that thought. Which means ultimately, and I believe this is a part of why most people keep themselves unconscious, is because that means there is no separation in being. You know, if we listen to Einstein when he says, if you think you're separate or separated from the rest of humanity, you're living in an optical delusion. In essence, that's what he's saying. That our mind creates this visual image of how you're separate from me, therefore we must be separate, but our thoughts aren't separate.
Right.
On that level, there is nothing in the material world that's dense enough to absorb the high energy wave that leaves the mind when we think a thought.
Well, that brings things to a whole different level.
Yes,
That
for
is
sure.
amazing.
And then when you realize that that world of energy, which includes the mind, operates by the law of resonance, then you add to that the purpose of life is to keep us alive, which means that if there's anything that we're holding on to with which we are killing ourselves, we're going to draw somebody in to bring that up and give us the opportunity to work through it. And that, I would offer, is a major part of what drives the world. And the crazier, the more pained, the more traumatized people's thoughts are, then the crazier, the more pained and traumatized their lives become, until they choose to go in and start to clean that up. Because life is always responding.
And that's why, yes, very much. We draw what we need to heal, or the opportunity to heal.
Exactly. It's like the Creator designed it, said, okay, you can destroy yourself if you want, but I set the system up so that if you're in the process of doing that, somebody's going to come and visit and show it to you. If you live in blame and blame them, then you'll lose your opportunity to learn forgiveness. If you move into responsibility, then you'll see that what's moving in you is moving in you because it's in you, and you'll start to work through it and heal.
Why? Absolutely amazing. Bit by bit, the information comes together.
Building the brain cells.
Building the brain cells, yes, sir. Wonderful. Thank you, Michael.
All right, you have a blessed one. We'll talk to you later.
All right. Bye
Thank you,
now.
everybody, for joining us. Blessings. Have the best year yet of your eternal life. It's an awesome gift to give the world. Blessings.